Hi, a warm welcome to ExpertsConnect on teachsomebody.com, and I'm your host, Kadian Davis-Owusu. Today, we're privileged to have Mrs. Claudia Clark, historian and political activist, and our conversation will be about the US presidential elections and the relevance of maintaining transatlantic unity. Hi, Claudia. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You're welcome, and we are excited to have you here. Can you tell us a bit about your background?
Sure. I am an expat, an American expat living in Germany since September 2017. I was born and raised in Michigan, but spent most of my adult life in California. I have a background in community organizing, political science, public policy, and history. And with that degree, I've spent most of my life working on progressive political causes, ranging for women's issues in particular, but also LGBT issues.
Okay, interesting. So, Claudia, we are already seeing the implications of the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg being so close to the US presidential elections. In action, we are seeing President Trump's speedy nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to fill Ginsburg's position. With this political ascension, many issues are at stake, which is worrying for the Democrats. Let's look at the Second Amendment for a moment, which protects an individual's right to keep and bear arms. In your capacity as a political activist, would Amy's political ascension undermine efforts already underway in some states to tighten gun laws?
I firmly believe her position will undermine a lot of any legislation for gun control. She admitted herself that she takes a radical position on gun control. There was a Supreme Court decision a few years ago. It's known as a Heller decision, where it granted individuals the right for firearms in their own home to protect themselves. But there were some stipulations for people that were mentally ill and prohibiting people from using them outside of their home in public institutions like government and schools. However, because that was a federal statute, it's been used by the state courts. And the one position or the one court case regarding this issue that came before her when she was on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, she argued that she dissented. And in her dissent, she said she believes that firearms should be allowed for anyone at any time, more or less. So arguing that the Second Amendment granted people the right, regardless of where they were going or who was allowed to bear arms. Anybody was allowed to. So that is a pretty radical decision. And so I'm not real optimistic she's going to provide much support for getting realistic and good gun control legislation.
Yeah, that's very concerning, Claudia. So, another potential issue at stake is repealing the Affordable Care Act, and that's Obamacare, enacted by former US President Barack Obama, which makes health insurance more affordable, especially to those in low income households. Now, if the ACA is repealed, then over 8.02 million people who now have COVID would be disqualified. Added to that, over 30 million low income people would lose their coverage. Claudia, how do you think Amy will rule on the Affordable Care Act?
Well, if you have been paying attention to the hearings and the questions asked, she has done an amazing job of dancing around the subject. So it's hard to get a feeling for her. However, Trump has made it no secret since he began campaigning in 2015 that eliminating the ACA was top priority of his. So I fear that the fact that she's gotten to the point where she has already states that she will do what she can to undermine that. Now, with that being said, she is also on the record 2 times of already declaring that the ACA is unconstitutional. In one case, she argued that the dissenters had a stronger or a better legal argument than the majority when they were trying to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And she's also gone on the record stating that in a 2012 decision that Justice Roberts pushed the ACA beyond its plausible meaning to the statute in order to save it. So if you go by what Trump wants and has been campaigning for and her past record, yes, it looks like she probably will try to override the ACA. But we could be surprised. She could surprise us. Several of Trump's appointees have already voted against him on a couple of surprising decisions. So we can be hopeful. I'm not overly optimistic, but I do want to try and give her the benefit of the doubt on that.
Yeah, let's be hopeful here, Claudia.
Yeah.
So in your article, Our Work is Not Over on January 20, 2021, which was posted on teachsomebody.com, you mentioned that the task of restoring civility in the United States, as well as repairing the severed relationships among our allies, is going to be a difficult task and it's going to take a very long time. What's your take on the relationship between President Trump and Angela Merkel and how it affected transatlantic unity?
Well, from the very beginning, Trump and Merkel have not gotten off to a very good start. When he campaigned in 2015, many of the things he campaigned against were things that Merkel and Obama worked very hard on together. For example, he called Merkel's policy on allowing Syrian refugees to come into Germany, he called that catastrophic. So and Merkel didn't back down on that. She just said that was her decision to make. So there was that issue. And then there was also the issue where Trump doesn't believe in climate change. He refers to it as a hoax by the Chinese and promised to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accord once he took office. So there was that issue. He withdrew the United States from the Iran nuclear deal. Another thing that Obama and Merkel were in the process of working on before Obama's election was a trade agreement called TPP between the United States and Europe, and Trump promised to get rid of that as well. So there's already that an animosity between the two of them. And then since he's taken office, he has routinely refused to back the EU leaders in their punishment of Putin. It was the EU leaders that after Putin illegally annexed Crimea, the EU leaders decided as a punishment they would throw Putin out of the G8 until he gave Crimea back. And Trump refuses to not only does Trump refuse to chastise Putin for that, but he publicly many times argued to reinstate Putin. So there's that. There's the issue that he continuously criticizes NATO and calls NATO obsolete. There was an instance when they were in Canada and at a G7 summit, and Trump took a couple of pieces of candy out of his pocket and threw it across the table at Merkel and said, don't hear Angela, don't say I never gave you anything. Yeah. And Merkel most recently told French President Macron, when invited to the United States for a G7 meeting, she refused, and she told President Macron she didn't even want to be in the same room with the guy, meaning Trump. So there has been quite a bit of animosity between the two of them. Now, with that said, I don't think the relationship is damaged forever. I think it is going to take a lot of diplomatic work to get us back to where we were. But being an expat, I watch the news, I talk to people, and the Europeans still believe the United States is a very firm ally, and they want that relationship restored. So it is going to take time, and it's not going to happen overnight, but I do think it will happen. And what it'll take is for Biden has already promised to return the United States to the Paris Climate Accord. Talking to Merkel about NATO, and just talking about, if they want to withdraw the U.S. troops, which Trump is threatening to do, whether that's a good idea or not, let them sit down. It was part of the controversy was it was done so hastily without anybody knowing about it, and they'll have a good conversation on whether it's necessary in a reasonable way that it can be done. I think Biden is willing to do that. I think part of the problem was Trump was threatened by Merkel. He would fight her, and she wouldn't take his bullying. She would just ignore it. And I think Biden is going to treat her with respect and listen to her, and not try and walk all over her.
Yeah, you have some really interesting insights, Claudia. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. Yeah, so I know you wrote a book, My Partner, My Friend, and I want to know more about it. Let's go back in time and examine the relationship between former President Obama and Chancellor Merkel. They both had a very strong affinity for each other, which you wrote about, and this also captivated the world. Chancellor Merkel referred to President Obama as my partner, my friend. Can you briefly highlight the highs and lows of their relationship?
Certainly. The low began, they actually started off on really, really bad or shaky ground, I should say. President Obama at the time was candidate Obama. He hadn't even received the nomination for the Democratic Party in 2008, and he wanted to come and speak to Berliners and Germans in front of the famous Brandenburg Gate. And Merkel said no. It just wasn't appropriate. And so that kind of irritated President Obama, because nobody had ever said, everybody loved him. He was a rock star and up and coming, and nobody had ever said no to him. So that kind of irritated him. And on Merkel's side, she thought President Obama was a lot of talk and no action. She heard him speak, and she's like, okay, he can talk, but can he do anything, or is he just talk? And so from the beginning, there was skepticism. And what I do in my book is I trace how we went from that point to the very, very end, where the last time Merkel saw President Obama in November 2016, she cried. And the very last person President Obama called before he left office was Chancellor Merkel. And that was done the day before the inauguration of Trump. And through that course, they had some ups and downs. For example, in 2009, Chancellor Merkel was given the opportunity to speak before a session of Congress. And that was the first time that a German chancellor had actually spoken in front of both the Senate and the House at one time. And that was a really big deal. The invitation came from Speaker Pelosi and not Obama, so it wasn't Obama's doing, but it happened while he was in office. And then eventually President Obama was able to speak in front of Brandenburg Gate. He did so 4 days shy of President Kennedy's famous JFK speech. And when he did so, Chancellor Merkel was sitting by his side when he did so. There was a situation in 2009 where President Obama was in Europe. He was in Germany, and he wanted to visit the Buchenwald former concentration camp. And he specifically wanted to do so because his great uncle was part of the Allied troops that liberated the camp. And in so doing, he was not the first president to visit a concentration camp, but he was the first one to do so at that particular camp. So when he gave a speech, Merkel was by his side, and her normally stoic face, she fought back the tears when she realized just how phenomenal it was that the two of them were together in a place where they had once been such fierce enemies. So it was touching. And then I think the final thing that I'll mention, there are several of them, but I think the final thing I'll mention was when they were in 2015, they were before a G7 summit, they were in a small Bavarian village, and they had breakfast and sausage and beer with the locals, where people from Bavaria could interact and eat and talk with them. And Chancellor Merkel was at the stage and she introduced President Obama. And President Obama, when he addressed the crowd, he just said, "Grüß gut, everyone," which means in Bavarian, not German, but Bavarian, the dialect, greetings from God. And that's what they say opposed to, Guten Tag. It's very region specific. And when President Obama said those words, the crowd went crazy. But no, I don't think anybody was happier or went crazier than Chancellor Merkel. She let down her guard and she giggled and she clapped and she cheered. And it was so unlike her. And I think the phrase I use in the book was she acted like a lovesick teenager. And so they had a relationship where they could be comfortable with one another. And that isn't to say that they didn't have their problems. Initially they had trouble learning to connect with one another. And then there was the problem later in 2013 when it was discovered that President Obama was tapping Merkel's personal cell phone. And ironically, she wasn't particularly upset about it. She was annoyed and she thought, it was kind of stupid and pointless, but she wasn't angry. But the German people were, and rightfully so. I do think President Obama was wrong for that. And so Merkel kind of had to put on a face of being irritated because the Germans were actually angry with her for not being angrier about it. And so that did cause a lot of a rift in the relationship. And it took them a long time to repair it. And I don't think, even in the final press conference 3 years later, the subject still came up. So it still was an ongoing problem. But the importance about the relationship was that they did have differences of opinions on economic issues, on whether to use military force against Putin after he annexed Crimea. But the takeaway was, despite the differences they had over the years, they always managed to come back stronger than ever. They knew the unity of allies and world leaders across the world was more important than personality problems.
Yeah, which is extremely exemplary.
Yes.
So, Claudia, my final question to you: what lessons can global leaders and even political adversaries learn from the partnership between Chancellor Merkel and President Obama?
I think the most important thing people can take away is that unity in these highly globalized times, with terrorism that can happen from somebody's computer in Belgium to Afghanistan to Canada, it can happen anywhere. And there are so many globalized problems between terrorism, climate change, that it is now more than ever, it is imperative that world leaders and allies and countries learn to rely and trust one another. And unfortunately, we have, not just with Trump, but with Brexit, and you're seeing it with the rise in the alt-right in other countries, more the isolationist country philosophy is taking hold, and that is dangerous. Merkel and Obama were from two different political parties. He was center left, she was center right. They didn't agree on everything, but they knew and understood the importance of working together and putting personality aside for the welfare of the general world and population. And I think that we're getting away. I don't expect people, they had an extraordinary relationship. I don't expect other world leaders to have that kind of bond between Obama and Merkel, but I think what we need to do is step away from the isolationist policies that are taking hold and go back to where we were with Obama. And Merkel and Obama can teach a lesson on how people of different political leanings can work together and how important it is in today's globalized world.
Yes, interesting insights, Claudia. Now, Claudia, thank you for your willingness to share your knowledge. The information you provided on the upcoming US presidential elections and the relevance of transatlantic relationships was very enlightening. To our viewers, thanks for tuning in to Experts Connect. We'll see you next week, where we will discuss exciting topics that will ignite your passion for learning. If you like the information presented, please feel free to go to teachsomebody.com and give it an applause, ask your questions, and share your comments. Please also follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Have a lovely week. Bye.
Bye, everyone.